Welcome to Jewelry Designer Manager Tips. Today we're going to look at which unit price to use when you're setting up component parts. And the way you get into this is by going to this Jewelry Parts tab on your main menu or into the Jewelry Parts tab at the top menu. So let's go here, and then you'll notice you have an option called Unit Price to Use. And you have four options. You have the last price you paid, the lowest price you ever paid, a weighted average, or you can specify a particular price. You can see that weight average is set as the default, and that's because weighted average does the best job of calculating the average cost of a part over time. For instance, this clasp that you see. In a sterling silver clasp, sometimes you may pay $1.18 per piece, then you may pay $1.22 per piece, then it may shoot up to $1.31 per piece and back down to $1.24, and over time that price is going to continuously fluctuate. What Jewelry Designer Manager does is it constantly does the calculation. It says, okay, I bought 5 of these clasps at $1.18. And then I bought 2 of these clasps at $1.22, and I bought another 5 of these clasps at $1.31, and then I bought 10 of them at $1.24, and it's constantly creating a weighted average price so that you have the most accurate look at the cost of a component over time. So we strongly recommend that you use the weighted average. And in fact, if you try to choose a different price type, you'll get this little pop-up that says we recommend that you use the weighted average. So if you are going to use a different price, you have to say OK to release the warning. So why might you want to specify price? Well, you might want to specify a price when you're first setting up your items in Jewelry Designer Manager. In that case, you might have a whole bin of this particular lobster clasp. And remember, a lobster clasp with this little finding around the base is a different lobster clasp than the one without this little finding around the base. You would set them up separately because they have a different look to them. They're not identical. But anyway, you may say, okay, over time, when I'm setting up my item for the first time, I think I've spent $1.21 on these clasps. And so in that case, you might specify the price for the pieces of inventory that you're entering from the very beginning. But then we'd recommend that you go back to weighted average for this unit price to use so that as you buy in new pieces and sell, and turn those pieces into finished goods, the system can then calculate a weighted average for you from there. So why might you want to use these other unit prices? Well, let's talk about an example in which you might want to use last price. Imagine that every year you go to Tucson and there's a vendor there that does this magnificent, unusually shaped, faceted pick a gemstone, chrysoprase. And every year the price does seem to go up. And by the time you buy that new inventory each year, you're usually out of the inventory that you bought from him the year before, and you want the pricing of the new items that you make with it to always reflect that higher price. You're selling at the higher price because you're always buying at the higher price. In that case, you may choose last as the unit price to use so that you're always basing your pricing on the new pieces at the higher prices that you're expecting. Now, there aren't many good reasons to use lowest price, and the examples that I have almost never apply to jewelry. But one reason you might use lowest price for unit price to use would be if you are intensely competitive on price and you're always competing to be the lowest price provider. And on certain commodities, you may want, and a clasp in this example could be an example of a commodity, or a very low cost wire, then you might say, I always want a price based on the lowest cost that I'm using because it's just so competitive in this particular product category that I can't afford to be more expensive than any of my competitors. So that might be an example of when to use the lowest price. But weighted average in Jewelry Designer Manager is selected as the default because except with rare Examples like the ones I just provided, there's really not a good reason to use any unit price other than weighted average because it does the math over time for you. So that's how to think about unit price to use when you're setting up jewelry parts. I hope this tip was helpful to you.